The ancient stone walls of Edinburgh Castle had witnessed countless ceremonies over 8 centuries, but none quite like this. As dawn broke over Scotland's capital on a crisp October morning, the Princess of Wales stood before an ornate mirror in the royal apartments, her reflection showing not just a future queen, but a woman about to receive an honor that would forever link her destiny to the Scottish crown. Kate Middleton's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the sapphire brooch that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. Outside, thousands of Scots gathered in the courtyard, their voices carrying ancient Gaelic songs through the morning mist. Today wasn't just another royal ceremony. Today, King Charles III would bestow upon his daughter-in-law a title that hadn't been granted to a royal family member in over 200 years. The weight of history pressed upon her shoulders as much as the ceremonial robe she wore. In just hours, she would kneel before her father-in-law in the great hall where Mary Queen of Scots once held court, and rise as the first woman in centuries to hold the ancient title of Duchess of Rothesay and Keeper of the Highland Crown. But this moment of triumph had been years in the making, born from tragedy, shaped by duty, and sealed by a promise made on a deathbed that would change the monarchy forever. What Kate didn't know was that this ceremony would spark a constitutional crisis that would shake the very foundations of the British monarchy and force her to choose between her family's safety and her duty to the crown. The story begins 3 years earlier on a rain-soaked November evening at Balmoral Castle, where Queen Elizabeth II lay in her final hours. The corridors that had echoed with laughter during summer holidays now carried only whispered conversations and the soft footsteps of medical staff. Kate Middleton sat beside the dying monarch's bedside, holding a frail hand that had signed thousands of documents, waved to millions of subjects, and guided a nation through decades of change. Catherine, the Queen's voice was barely a whisper, but her eyes remained sharp and focused. There's something I must tell you before I go. Something about Scotland that only the monarch and one other person have known for 70 years. Kate leaned closer, her heart racing. She had grown close to her grandmother-in-law over the years, but this felt different. This felt like a state secret being passed down through generations. In the royal vault beneath Edinburgh Castle, the Queen continued, pausing to catch her breath. There lies a document signed by my grandfather, King George V, and the last legitimate descendant of the ancient Scottish royal line. A woman named Moira MacLeod, who died in 1952 without children. The Queen's grip tightened on Kate's hand. Before she died, Moira made the crown promise that when the time was right, when Scotland needed it most, the ancient title of Duchess of Rothesay and Keeper of the Highland Crown would be restored. Not to a blood descendant, because there were none, but to someone who truly loved Scotland and its people. Kate felt tears welling in her eyes. She had always been drawn to Scotland, from her first visit to St. Andrews University where she met William, to their honeymoon cottage on the Isle of Anglesey, to the countless Highland games and clan gatherings she had attended over the years. But she never imagined this conversation. The title comes with real power, the Queen explained, her voice growing stronger with urgency. The Keeper of the Highland Crown has the right to convene the ancient Scottish Parliament, to speak for Scotland's interests directly to the monarch, and to invoke protections for Scottish culture and law that supersede even Westminster. A nurse entered quietly to check the Queen's vital signs, but Elizabeth waved her away with surprising force. Not yet, she commanded. This cannot wait. Kate's mind raced with questions. Your Majesty, why are you telling me this? Surely Charles should know, or William? The Queen smiled, the first genuine smile Kate had seen from her in weeks. Because Charles will be too focused on unifying the kingdom after my death. William doesn't yet understand the delicate balance between English and Scottish identity that will be crucial for the monarchy's survival. But you, Catherine, you've always understood that being royal means serving something larger than yourself. Thunder rolled across the Scottish Highlands outside, and Kate thought about all the times she had walked those ancient hills, feeling connected to something timeless and profound. She thought about the Scottish nannies who had cared for George, Charlotte, and Louis, teaching them Gaelic songs and Highland stories. She thought about the way William's face lit up when they crossed the border into Scotland, as if he were coming home. The ceremony must take place at Edinburgh Castle, the Queen continued, in the Great Hall, with representatives of all the Scottish clans present. The crown jewels of Scotland must be displayed, and the Stone of Destiny must be present. Charles will understand when you show him Moira's document. Kate felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a Highland cloak. What if I'm not worthy of such an honor? What if the Scottish people don't accept me? The Queen's eyes sparkled with something between mischief and wisdom. Catherine, you've spent 12 years proving your worth to the British people. You've raised 3 children who love Scotland as much as England. You've stood by William through scandals and triumphs. You've modernized the monarchy while respecting its traditions. If anyone can bridge the gap between ancient Scotland and modern Britain, it's you. A commotion in the hallway announced the arrival of King Charles, who had been meeting with government officials in London. Kate heard his familiar voice speaking urgently with the doctors, asking about his mother's condition. The Queen's grip on Kate's hand became almost painful in its intensity. "Promise me," she whispered fiercely. "Promise me you'll accept this honor when Charles offers it. Promise me you'll use the power wisely to protect Scotland's heritage and Britain's unity." Kate looked into those famous blue eyes one last time and saw not just a dying monarch, but a woman passing the torch of responsibility to the next generation. "I promise, Your Majesty. I promise I'll do whatever is needed for the good of the realm." The Queen smiled and released Kate's hand just as Charles entered the room, his face drawn with exhaustion and grief. Kate quietly slipped out to give the family privacy, but she carried with her the weight of a promise that would soon change everything. That night, as the Queen's condition deteriorated further, Kate walked the grounds of Balmoral under a star-filled sky. She thought about the generations of Scottish kings and queens who had walked these same paths, about the clans who had fought and died for independence, about the complex relationship between Scotland and England that had shaped British history. She didn't know it yet, but word of the Queen's imminent death was already spreading through certain circles in Scotland. Nationalist politicians were preparing statements about Scotland's future relationship with the monarchy. Independence activists were planning rallies. And in the shadowy world of Scottish politics, some were already questioning whether Charles would honor the ancient promises made by his predecessors. By dawn, Queen Elizabeth II was gone, and with her passing, a chain of events began that would ultimately lead Kate to that mirror in Edinburgh Castle, preparing for a ceremony that would either strengthen the bonds between Scotland and England or tear them apart forever. The funeral arrangements consumed the following weeks, but Kate couldn't shake the memory of that bedside conversation. She found herself researching Scottish history, learning about the ancient role of the keeper of the Highland crown, understanding the complex political implications of what the Queen had asked her to do. When Charles finally approached her about the title, 6 months after the funeral, Kate was ready. She understood that this wasn't just about personal honor or royal tradition. This was about the survival of the United Kingdom itself, and about her role in either preserving that union or watching it crumble under the weight of centuries-old grievances. The King's proposal was both more and less than she expected. More, because it came with genuine political power and responsibility. Less, because it also came with dangers she was only beginning to understand. 6 months after the Queen's funeral, Kate found herself in the oak-paneled study at Clarence House, facing King Charles across a desk covered with ancient documents and legal opinions. The morning light streaming through tall windows illuminated pages of Scottish constitutional law that hadn't been examined seriously in over 2 centuries. "Catherine," Charles began, his voice carrying the weight of his new crown, "I've spent considerable time reviewing the documents Mother shared with you. The legal team has confirmed their authenticity and, more importantly, their binding nature on the crown." Kate nodded, remembering that final conversation with Queen Elizabeth. "Your Majesty, I've been researching the historical precedents. The last keeper of the Highland crown was instrumental in preventing Scottish rebellion in the early 1800s. The position isn't ceremonial." Charles leaned back in his chair, suddenly, looking older than his years. "That's precisely what concerns me. The Scottish National Party has been gaining ground since Mother's death. Independence polls are running higher than they have in decades. Some of my advisors believe bestowing this title could be seen as either appeasement or provocation, depending on how it's handled." The King stood and walked to a large map of Britain hanging on the wall, his finger tracing the border between England and Scotland. "But there's another factor at play. 3 weeks ago, I received a delegation of Scottish clan chiefs at Holyrood House. They came bearing a petition signed by representatives of over 40 clans, requesting the restoration of the keepership." Kate's eyes widened in surprise. "They asked for it specifically?" "They asked for you specifically," Charles corrected, turning back to face her. "It seems your work with Scottish charities, your children's Scottish heritage education, and your genuine respect for Highland culture having gone unnoticed. The petition explicitly requests that the Princess of Wales be granted the title. A heavy silence fell between them as Kate processed this information. She had always known that her public appearances in Scotland were closely watched, but she hadn't realized the depth of support she had garnered among the traditional Scottish leadership. However, Charles continued, his tone becoming more grave. We've also received intelligence that certain political factions view this as a threat. The more radical independence activists believe that restoring ancient Scottish titles to English royals is an attempt to co-opt their movement. They're planning protests. Kate thought about her children, about the security implications of accepting such a controversial honor. What kind of protests? Charles handed her a folder marked with security classifications. According to MI5, nothing violent is planned, but there are concerns about disruption during the ceremony. More troubling is the political backlash we might face in Westminster. Some members of Parliament are questioning whether the monarchy should be granting titles with real constitutional power without parliamentary oversight. Kate opened the folder and read the intelligence briefing. The reports painted a picture of a Scotland caught between its ancient heritage and its modern political aspirations. Traditional clan leaders supported the restoration as a return to Scottish autonomy within the Union, while progressive politicians saw it as an outdated gesture that ignored Scotland's real grievances with London rule. There's something else, Charles said quietly. The document Mother mentioned, the one from Moira MacLeod, contains provisions that haven't been activated in centuries. As Keeper of the Highland Crown, you would have the right to call for a Scottish Constitutional Convention if you believed Scotland's interests were being threatened. You could essentially force a conversation about Scottish autonomy that Westminster has been trying to avoid. Kate felt her pulse quicken. This was far more than a ceremonial title. This was real political power, the kind that could reshape the relationship between Scotland and England. Have you discussed this with the Prime Minister? Charles smiled grimly. 3 times. Each conversation has been more tense than the last. Downing Street is concerned about setting precedents. If we grant ancient constitutional powers to Scottish titles, what stops Wales from demanding similar recognition? What stops Northern Ireland from claiming historical rights that supersede modern law? A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Charles's private secretary entered with an urgent message. Your Majesty, the First Minister of Scotland, is requesting an immediate meeting. She says it's regarding the keepership proposal. Charles sighed and looked at Kate. Nicola MacLeod has been the most vocal supporter of Scottish independence since becoming First Minister. If she's requesting a meeting about this, it means the political stakes just got higher. Kate stood and walked to the window, looking out at the London traffic. She thought about the Queen's words, about the promise she had made, about the weight of history resting on her shoulders. Your Majesty, what do you think the Queen would want me to do? Mother believed in the power of symbols to unite rather than divide, Charles replied. She also believed in honoring the Crown's commitments, even when they're politically inconvenient. But, Catherine, this decision ultimately rests with you. If you accept this title, you'll be stepping into a role that could define your legacy and potentially change the course of British history. 2 days later, Kate found herself in Edinburgh, sitting across from First Minister Nicola MacLeod in the elegant surroundings of Bude House. The First Minister was younger than Kate had expected, with sharp eyes and a reputation for political cunning that had made her the most formidable advocate for Scottish independence in generations. Your Royal Highness, MacLeod began, her Scottish accent carrying both respect and challenge. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me personally. The restoration of the keepership is a matter of significant interest to the Scottish government. Kate chose her words carefully. First Minister, I understand this raises complex questions about Scotland's relationship with the Crown. I wanted to hear your perspective before making any decisions. MacLeod smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The Scottish people have a complicated relationship with the monarchy. On one hand, we respect the institution and its role in our history. On the other hand, we've often felt that our voices are secondary to English interests when it comes to royal decisions. The First Minister stood and walked to a window overlooking Edinburgh's Royal Mile. The keepership of the Highland Crown represents something different. It's a Scottish title with Scottish responsibilities. If granted to someone who truly understands and advocates for Scottish interests, it could be a bridge between our traditions and our aspirations. Kate sensed there was more to this conversation than appeared on the surface. And if it's granted to someone who doesn't understand those interests. MacLeod turned back to face Kate directly. Then, it becomes another symbol of London's attempts to control Scottish identity. Another reason for Scots to question whether we're better served by independence. The political chess game was becoming clearer. Kate realized that her acceptance or rejection of the title would be interpreted as a statement about the monarchy's commitment to Scottish autonomy. Accept, and she risked being seen as either a puppet of London or a genuine advocate for Scotland. Refuse, and she could be accused of rejecting Scottish heritage and traditional authority. First Minister, Kate said carefully, if I were to accept this title, what would the Scottish government expect from me? MacLeod sat back down, leaning forward with obvious interest. We would expect the keeper of the Highland crown to be exactly what the title suggests, a keeper of Scottish interests. Someone who would use their unique position to advocate for Scotland within the Union, to protect our cultural heritage, and to ensure that Scottish voices are heard at the highest levels of government. Kate realized she was being offered a political alliance, one that could either strengthen the Union by giving Scotland a powerful advocate within the royal family, or weaken it by creating a rival center of power that could challenge Westminster's authority. The meeting ended with no commitments made, but Kate left Edinburgh understanding that the stakes were higher than she had imagined. This wasn't just about honoring a promise to a dying queen. This was about the future of the United Kingdom itself, and her role in either holding it together or watching it peacefully evolve into something entirely new. As her car drove south toward London, Kate stared out at the rolling border country, thinking about the generations of Scots and English who had fought and died over this land. She thought about her children's future, about the kind of country they would inherit, and about the responsibility that came with the power to shape that future. By the time she reached Kensington Palace, Kate had made her decision. But she also knew that accepting the keepership would put her at the center of a political storm that could test everything she believed about duty, family, and the meaning of service to the Crown. 3 weeks after her meeting with the First Minister, Kate was reviewing security protocols in her private office at Kensington Palace when her private secretary knocked urgently. Your Royal Highness, there's a gentleman here who insists on speaking with you personally about the Scottish matter. He says his name is Duncan MacBride, and he has information about threats to the ceremony. Kate looked up from the files scattered across her desk. The name was familiar from her research into Scottish clan politics. MacBride was reportedly the unofficial leader of a group calling themselves the Traditional Scots Alliance, but intelligence reports had been vague about their actual activities and membership. Show him in, Kate decided, but ensure security is present. Duncan MacBride was a tall, weathered man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He wore a simple tweed jacket, but Kate noticed the quality of the fabric and the clan pin on his lapel that marked him as a chief of considerable standing. Your Royal Highness, he began, his voice carrying the distinctive cadence of the Highlands. I apologize for the unconventional approach, but what I have to tell you cannot be communicated through normal channels. Kate gestured for him to sit, studying his face carefully. Mr. MacBride, I understand you have concerns about the keepership ceremony. MacBride leaned forward, his expression grave. Your Highness, I represent a coalition of clan leaders, historians, and traditionalists who have uncovered something deeply troubling. There are forces working to ensure that your ceremony either fails spectacularly or succeeds for all the wrong reasons. Kate felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of forces? Both political and financial, MacBride explained, pulling out a folder from his briefcase. We've discovered that certain members of Parliament, working with radical independence activists, are planning to disrupt the ceremony not to prevent it, but to ensure it becomes a public relations disaster that discredits both the monarchy and traditional Scottish leadership. He handed Kate a series of photographs and documents. These show meetings between Westminster politicians and extreme nationalist groups. Their plan is to allow the ceremony to proceed, then use planted agitators to create violence that will be blamed on legitimate Scottish concerns about the monarchy. Kate studied the evidence, her heart sinking. The photographs showed familiar faces from Parliament meeting in secret with individuals she didn't recognize. Why would members of Parliament want the ceremony to fail? Because a successful restoration of the keepership gives Scotland a legitimate voice within the constitutional framework, MacBride replied. That undermines both Westminster's control and the independence movement's narrative that Scotland can only be heard through separation. MacBride stood and walked to the window, looking out at the London skyline. But there's another group working against you as well. Certain wealthy interests, both English and American, who profit from the current uncertainty about Scotland's future. They've invested heavily in Scottish assets that would lose value if political stability returns to the region. Kate felt overwhelmed by the complexity of what she was hearing. Mr. McBride, why are you telling me this? What do you want me to do? We want you to proceed with the ceremony, but with full knowledge of the dangers, he said, turning back to face her. More importantly, we want to offer you protection and support that goes beyond what royal security can provide. McBride opened his briefcase again and withdrew what appeared to be an ancient document sealed in protective covering. This is a copy of the original covenant of the Highland Crown, signed in 1547. It establishes not just the powers of the keeper, but also the obligations of the Scottish clans to protect and support whoever holds the title. Kate examined the document, surprised by its good condition and the elaborate seals attached. Are you saying the clans still honor this covenant? 37 of the 43 remaining recognized clans have confirmed their commitment to the covenant, McBride replied. If you accept the keepership, you'll have the protection of a network that has survived centuries of political upheaval. We know how to operate when conventional authority fails. Kate realized she was being offered something unprecedented, the support of a shadow network that operated parallel to official government. What would this protection involve? McBride smiled for the first time since entering the room. Alternative security arrangements, independent intelligence gathering, safe houses throughout Scotland, and, most importantly, genuine popular support that no amount of political maneuvering can undermine. Over the next hour, McBride outlined a comprehensive plan that read like something from a spy novel. The clan network had identified the key troublemakers planning to disrupt the ceremony, developed strategies for neutralizing threats without involving official security services, and created backup plans for every conceivable scenario. We've been preparing for this restoration for decades, McBride explained. When Queen Elizabeth visited certain clan gatherings, she was actually meeting with our leadership to discuss contingencies. She knew this day would come, and she wanted to ensure the Scottish people had a way to protect their interests regardless of what happened in London or Edinburgh. Kate felt a new understanding of the late Queen's foresight and political sophistication. She was building a fail-safe system. Exactly, McBride confirmed. A way for Scotland to maintain its voice and identity within the Union, protected from both English overreach and Scottish extremism. As the meeting concluded, McBride handed Kate a small device that looked like an ordinary mobile phone. This provides secure communication with our network. If you decide to proceed with the ceremony, you'll have support that most people will never see, but that will be absolutely crucial to your success. That evening, Kate discussed McBride's visit with William over dinner at their private apartment. Her husband listened intently as she described the complex web of political and financial interests working against the keepership restoration. So you're telling me that accepting this title puts you at the center of a conspiracy that involves MPs, independence activists, international investors, and a secret clan network? William asked, his concern evident. Kate nodded, realizing how extraordinary it all sounded. According to McBride, the very existence of these opposing forces proves how important the keepership could be. If it were merely ceremonial, no one would care enough to try to stop it. William took her hand across the dinner table. Catherine, I've always supported your dedication to public service, but this feels different. This feels dangerous. Kate squeezed his hand, thinking about the promise she had made to his grandmother and the responsibility she felt to honor it. William, your grandmother chose me for this role because she believed I could handle the challenges it would bring. I can't let fear of political consequences override my duty to the crown and to Scotland. That night, Kate lay awake thinking about the choice before her. She could decline the title, citing security concerns or political complications, and return to her normal role as Princess of Wales. Or she could step forward into a role that would make her one of the most politically significant figures in the United Kingdom, with the power to influence the future of the Union, but also with enemies who would stop at nothing to see her fail. She thought about her children's Scottish heritage, about the Highland Games where George had learned to throw the cobber and Charlotte had danced with clan members in traditional dress. She thought about the Scottish nannies who had become like family, and about the way William's eyes lit up whenever they crossed the border into Scotland. By morning, Kate had made her final decision. She would accept the title and everything that came with it. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she was walking into, and whether the clan network's protection was as real as McBride claimed. Her investigation would take her into a hidden world of Scottish politics that few outsiders had ever seen, and would reveal that the ceremony at Edinburgh Castle was just the beginning of a much larger transformation in how Scotland's relationship with the Crown would be defined. Kate activated the secure phone McBride had given her and sent a simple message: "I'm in. When do we start?" The response came within minutes. "Meet us in the Highlands tomorrow night. Come alone. It's time you understood what you're really fighting for." The drive through the Scottish Highlands at dusk felt surreal to Kate as her unmarked Range Rover navigated the winding single-track roads leading deep into Clan McBride territory. She had told William she was visiting a Scottish charity overnight, which wasn't entirely untrue, but she had never undertaken such a clandestine journey in her 12 years as a royal. The coordinates Duncan McBride had provided led to what appeared to be a remote hunting lodge nestled in a glen surrounded by ancient pine forests. As Kate's vehicle approached, she noticed other cars emerging from different directions, their occupants clearly arriving for the same gathering. Her Royal Protection Officer, Inspector Sarah Hyland, seemed unusually calm about the unconventional security arrangements. "Ma'am," Inspector Hyland said as they parked, "I should mention that I've been briefed about tonight's meeting through channels that don't appear in my official reports." Kate looked at her with surprise. "Sarah, how long have you known about the clan network?" Hyland smiled as she checked her weapon. "My grandmother was a MacLeod, Your Royal Highness. Some loyalties run deeper than government employment." As they approached the lodge, the heavy wooden door opened to reveal Duncan McBride, now dressed in full Highland regalia, including a ceremonial dirk at his side. Behind him stood a group of men and women ranging in age from their 30s to their 80s, all wearing clan colors and bearing the unmistakable bearing of natural leaders. "Your Royal Highness," McBride said formally, "welcome to the true Parliament of the Highlands. These are the keepers of Scotland's real heritage." Kate was introduced to a remarkable assembly of individuals whose day jobs ranged from university professors and business executives to farmers and military officers. What united them was their role as clan chiefs, hereditary keepers of ancient knowledge, and their shared commitment to protecting Scottish culture within the British Union. "We meet like this every few months," explained Fiona MacLeod, a woman in her 50s who Kate recognized as a prominent Edinburgh lawyer. "Away from government surveillance, political pressure, and media attention, here we can discuss Scotland's real interests without interference." The group moved into the lodge's main room, where a large fire crackled in a stone hearth beneath portraits of Highland warriors and clan banners dating back centuries. Maps of Scotland covered one wall, marked with symbols that Kate didn't immediately recognize. "Before we discuss your ceremony," said an elderly man introduced as Chief Robert Mackenzie, "you need to understand what the keepership actually means in practical terms." Mackenzie moved to the maps and pointed to various locations throughout Scotland. These marks show places where ancient Scottish law still technically supersedes British law. Properties held under clan charter, historical sites protected by royal decree, fishing and hunting rights that predate the Act of Union. As keeper of the Highland Crown, you would have legal authority over all of these. Kate studied the maps with growing amazement. "How many properties are we talking about?" "Over 3,000 individual holdings," replied Fiona MacLeod, "plus mineral rights, forestry concessions, and traditional fishing grounds that together represent about 15% of Scotland's total land area." Duncan McBride joined them at the map wall. "More importantly, you would have the legal authority to grant or revoke certain commercial licenses, to require environmental assessments for major development projects, and to invoke traditional Scottish law in disputes involving these properties." Kate began to understand why certain political and financial interests were so concerned about the keepership restoration. This isn't just ceremonial power. This is real economic influence. "Exactly," confirmed Chief Mackenzie. "The last keeper used these powers to prevent the Highland clearances from being even more devastating than they were. She negotiated protections for thousands of families and preserved clan lands that might otherwise have been lost forever." Fiona MacLeod handed Kate a thick folder filled with legal documents. "These are modern cases where keepership authority could make a significant difference. Proposed wind farms that threaten ancient burial grounds, housing developments that would destroy historical sites, and commercial fishing operations that ignore traditional clan rights." As Kate reviewed the documents, she realized the full scope of what she was being asked to undertake. This wasn't just about representing Scottish interests to the monarchy. This was about wielding real power to protect Scottish heritage against modern commercial and political pressures. But there's something else you need to know, said Duncan McBride, his tone becoming more serious. The ceremony at Edinburgh Castle is being watched by interests that extend far beyond Scotland or even Britain. Chief Mackenzie produced a series of intelligence reports that looked like they came from military sources. European investors have been buying Scottish properties and businesses at unprecedented rates over the past 5 years. Much of this investment is legitimate, but some of it appears designed to gain control over strategic resources. Kate studied the reports, noting references to rare earth mineral deposits, renewable energy potential, and water resources. Are you saying Scotland is being targeted for resource exploitation? We're saying that certain international interests view Scottish political uncertainty as an opportunity, replied Fiona MacLeod. Independence would create regulatory chaos that could be exploited. Continued subjugation to Westminster would maintain a system that favors outside investors over local communities. But a strong keeper of the Highland Crown could protect Scottish interests while maintaining political stability. Duncan McBride walked to the fireplace and stared into the flames. 3 weeks ago, we intercepted communications suggesting that some of the planned disruptions to your ceremony are being funded by shell companies with connections to these foreign investors. They want the keepership to fail because they're afraid of what you might accomplish. The room fell silent as Kate processed this information. She was being asked to step into a role that would make her a target not just of domestic political opponents, but of international interests with vast financial resources and few scruples about how they protected their investments. What kind of protection can you actually offer? Kate asked directly. Chief Mackenzie smiled grimly. Your Royal Highness, the clan network has survived 8 centuries of warfare, political persecution, and cultural suppression. We know how to protect what matters to us. Over the next 2 hours, the clan leaders outlined a security and support system that impressed Kate with its sophistication and scope. Safe houses in every major Scottish city, secure communication networks, intelligence gathering capabilities that rivaled government services, and, perhaps most importantly, a level of popular support that no amount of political maneuvering could undermine. When you take the oath as keeper, explained Fiona MacLeod, you won't just be receiving a title. You'll be joining a community that has protected Scottish interests for centuries, regardless of which government was in power in London or Edinburgh. As the evening concluded, Kate was presented with a small silver medallion bearing the ancient symbol of the Highland Crown. Wear this during the ceremony, Duncan McBride instructed. It will identify you to clan members in the crowd and signal that you understand the full meaning of what you're undertaking. The drive back to Edinburgh gave Kate time to reflect on everything she had learned. The role she was accepting was far more complex and dangerous than she had originally understood, but it was also far more meaningful. She would have the power to protect Scottish heritage and communities in ways that no other member of the royal family could. More importantly, she would be continuing a tradition of service that extended back to the earliest days of Scottish history. The clan leaders hadn't just offered her political support. They had offered her membership in a community dedicated to preserving something precious and irreplaceable. As Edinburgh came into view in the early morning light, Kate thought about the ceremony that was now just days away. She understood the risks she was taking, the enemies she was making, and the responsibilities she was accepting. But she also understood that this was her chance to honor the promise she had made to Queen Elizabeth and to serve Scotland in a way that could make a real difference. The medallion felt warm against her chest as she returned to Holyrood House to begin the final preparations for a ceremony that would either mark the beginning of a new chapter in Scottish history or become a spectacular failure that would haunt the monarchy for generations. Either way, Kate was committed to seeing it through to the end. The morning of the ceremony dawned crisp and clear over Edinburgh Castle, with autumn sunlight casting golden shadows across the ancient stone walls. Kate stood at the window of the royal apartments, watching as thousands of Scots gathered in the grass market below, their voices carrying the haunting melodies of traditional Highland songs through the Scottish air. Inspector Hyland knocked softly on the door. Your Royal Highness, the clan representatives have arrived and are taking their positions in the Great Hall. Security reports everything is proceeding normally, but we've identified several individuals of interest in the crowd. Kate turned from the window, feeling the weight of the ceremonial robe she wore. The deep blue silk was embroidered with ancient Scottish symbols, and the silver medallion from the Highland gathering rested against her heart. Are you concerned about the identified individuals? Not particularly, ma'am, Hyland replied with a slight smile. Most of them appear to be undercover clan members providing additional security. Duncan McBride's network is more extensive than anyone in official circles realized. At precisely noon, the ceremony began with the ancient ritual that had not been performed in over 2 centuries. Kate walked through corridors that had witnessed the crowning of Scottish kings and queens, past tapestries depicting the great battles of Scottish independence, toward the Great Hall, where King Charles waited in full ceremonial regalia. The hall itself took Kate's breath away. Representatives of 37 Scottish clans stood in formation along both sides of the ancient chamber, each bearing their clan banners and wearing traditional Highland dress. At the far end, King Charles stood before a simple wooden chair that Kate recognized as a replica of the ancient throne of Scottish kings. The crown jewels of Scotland gleamed on a table beside the throne, and, most remarkably, the Stone of Destiny sat in its place of honor, having been transported from Westminster Abbey for this historic occasion. The symbolism was powerful and deliberate. Scotland's most sacred artifacts were present for the restoration of Scotland's most ancient title. As Kate walked down the aisle between the clan representatives, she felt the weight of history pressing upon her shoulders. These weren't just political supporters or curious observers. These were the keepers of Scottish heritage, men and women whose families had protected Scottish culture through centuries of political upheaval. Duncan McBride stepped forward as Kate approached the throne. In his role as senior clan chief, he would present her to the king for the investiture. "Your Majesty," he said in a voice that carried throughout the hall, "I present to you Catherine Elizabeth Middleton, Princess of Wales, who seeks to be confirmed as keeper of the Highland crown and Duchess of Rothesay." King Charles, wearing the ancient robes of Scottish royalty, looked every inch the monarch as he addressed the assembled gathering. "We are here today to restore a title that has protected Scottish interests for centuries, and to entrust its powers to one who has proven her dedication to the people of Scotland and the unity of our realm." The ceremony proceeded with rituals that combined ancient Scottish tradition with modern constitutional requirements. Kate knelt before the king as he placed the ancient coronet of the Highland crown upon her head, its silver Celtic designs catching the light from the tall windows. "Catherine Elizabeth," Charles intoned, "do you solemnly promise and swear to be faithful and bear true allegiance to the Scottish people, to maintain their laws and customs, to protect their heritage, and to serve their interests with wisdom and courage?" Kate's voice carried clearly through the hall as she replied, "I solemnly promise so to do." The king continued, "Do you promise to use the ancient powers of this office for the protection of Scotland's people, the preservation of Scotland's culture, and the strengthening of the bonds between Scotland and the crown?" "I solemnly promise so to do." As King Charles lifted the ceremonial sword and touched Kate's shoulders, officially confirming her title, the clan representatives began a traditional Highland chant that seemed to make the ancient stones themselves vibrate with approval. The sound was both thrilling and deeply moving, connecting Kate to centuries of Scottish warriors and leaders who had stood in this same hall. But as the formal ceremony concluded and Kate rose as the newly confirmed keeper of the Highland crown, the real test began. Through the tall windows, she could see smoke rising from the streets below, and the sound of shouting could be heard even through the thick stone walls. Inspector Highland appeared at Kate's side with urgent news. "Your Royal Highness, we have multiple disturbances in the city center. It appears the planned disruptions are beginning, but not in the way intelligence suggested." Kate moved to the window with growing alarm. Below, she could see crowds of protesters clashing not with police, but with each other. Groups carrying Scottish independence banners were fighting with others waving Union Jacks, while a third group seemed to be attacking both sides indiscriminately. Duncan McBride joined them at the window, his expression grim. "This is exactly what we feared. The agitators are trying to turn legitimate political differences into violence that will discredit everyone involved." King Charles approached, having been briefed by his own security team. "Catherine, I'm told we have options. We can evacuate you immediately and issue statements later, or we can proceed with the traditional public appearance and risk being caught in the middle of whatever is happening in the streets." Kate looked down at the crowds below and thought about everything she had learned over the past months. The clan network had prepared her for this moment, but the decision was ultimately hers alone. She could retreat to safety and let others deal with the political fallout, or she could step forward into the chaos and try to fulfill the role she had just accepted. "Your Majesty," Kate said firmly, "the keeper of the Highland crown doesn't hide from Scottish troubles. I need to address the crowd directly. Against the urgent protests of security personnel, Kate made her way to the castle's main balcony, where a microphone had been set up for the traditional address to the gathered crowds. But instead of the celebration that had been planned, she looked down on a scene of growing chaos and confusion. Kate took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice carrying across Edinburgh through amplification systems that carried her words to every corner of the city. "People of Scotland," she began, "I stand before you today not just as your Princess of Wales, but as the newly confirmed keeper of the Highland Crown." The fighting in the streets began to slow as people stopped to listen to this unexpected address. Kate continued, her voice growing stronger and more confident. "This title comes with ancient powers that I intend to use for the protection of all Scottish people, regardless of their political beliefs or their views on Scotland's future." She paused, seeing that the various groups below were now paying attention. "I know there are those who oppose this restoration, just as there are those who see it as a symbol of hope. But I want to be clear about what this title means to me and what it will mean for Scotland." Kate's next words would be quoted in newspapers around the world and would establish her as a major political figure in her own right. "As Keeper of the Highland Crown, I commit to using the legal powers of this office to protect Scottish communities from exploitation, to preserve Scottish culture and heritage, and to ensure that Scottish voices are heard at every level of government." The crowds below had largely stopped fighting and were now listening intently. Kate continued, "This doesn't mean choosing between Scotland and Britain. It means ensuring that Scotland's place within Britain is one of respect, equality, and genuine partnership." As Kate concluded her impromptu speech, something remarkable happened. The various protest groups, instead of resuming their conflicts, began to disperse peacefully. The presence of the newly invested Keeper of the Highland Crown seemed to have provided a focal point for Scottish identity that transcended the usual political divisions. Later that evening, as Kate reviewed news coverage of the day's events, she realized that the ceremony had achieved something no one had expected. Instead of inflaming political tensions, her investiture had provided a new model for Scottish leadership that combined respect for tradition with commitment to practical progress. Duncan McBride called that night to report that the clan network's intelligence suggested the foreign investors who had been hoping to exploit Scottish political chaos were reassessing their strategies. The successful restoration of the keepership had created a new center of Scottish power that they hadn't anticipated and couldn't easily influence. King Charles also called, his voice mixing pride with concern. "Catherine, what you accomplished today was extraordinary, but you've also painted a target on your back that will never disappear. The powers you now wield make you one of the most politically significant people in Britain." Kate stood on the balcony of Holyrood House that night, looking out over the Edinburgh skyline, and thinking about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From a bedside promise to a dying queen, through political conspiracies and clan gatherings, to a ceremony that had changed not just her own life, but potentially the future of Scotland itself. The ancient title she now bore came with responsibilities that would challenge her for the rest of her life. She would need to navigate between Scottish nationalism and British unionism, between ancient traditions and modern realities, between the expectations of the clan network and the demands of constitutional monarchy. But as she touched the silver medallion at her throat and felt the weight of the Highland crown upon her head, Kate knew she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had made a promise to Queen Elizabeth, and she had honored it in a way that exceeded even the late Queen's expectations. The Keeper of the Highland Crown was more than a title now. It was a living symbol of Scotland's ability to preserve its identity while remaining part of something larger. And Kate Elizabeth Middleton, Princess of Wales and Duchess of Rothesay, was prepared to spend the rest of her life proving worthy of the trust that Scotland had placed in her.